I love how it says that. Recording. All right, let's reshare here. All right, so before we get started, I'm just going to run through some brief announcements. If you've never joined us before, welcome, welcome, welcome. We're so happy you're here. We are the New Hampshire chapter of the User Experience Professionals Association. It is an international organization with chapters all over the world. Our chapter, we do not require membership to the UXPA. It's just open to anybody who wants to join. Anybody who is just interested in user experience in general, we welcome you. If you want to stay in touch with us, we welcome that as well. We have a Facebook group. We're on Twitter. There's a Slack group. You can find links to all of these. I think in the chat, we're going to be sharing them as well on our website, nhuxpa.org. We do have a listserv if you want to receive notifications of our meetings. With our listserv, we try to keep it at just 2 emails a month, just one letting you know of the event and one reminding you of it. So you won't get inundated with email, I promise. So my name is Kyle Susi. I'm one of the board members. We have Christine, Cal, and Julia, who are also board members. Can give a wave. And we're here for you. We want to make this group as useful and helpful as possible. If you want to, be a speaker, we're happy to listen to anybody who would like to have an opportunity to do that. It's a great way to get into speaking if you're anxious to speak at industry events. Maybe you want to speak at chapter meetings just to get into it, get a little dip your toe in the water. We're welcome to that. If you want to just give us topics that you're interested in and say, hey, I want to hear more about this, we're all ears. We want to hear your suggestions, so you can reach out to any one of us. We will have an opening. I am actually going to be retiring from the board, so we are looking for a replacement. So I am the digital operations director. What that means is that I update the website, create the Eventbrite posts, send out emails. Super easy stuff. You don't have to be a digital whiz. I will train you to do all the updating, and I'm not a WordPress queen at all or anything like that. It's very easy stuff. So if you are interested in that, it's just 3 to 4 hours a month. We will be posting more details about opening it up for nominations in a few weeks. So just stay tuned for that. Other upcoming UX events that you might be interested in. The Rosenfeld Media has this Civic Design Conference. This is their first year they're doing civic design, and it looks really amazing. So if you're interested in that type of work, it's happening in December. They also have another conference, Advancing Research. I attended this last year, and I thought it was one of the best virtual events. They really made it engaging, which is so hard to do when you're attending a multi-day conference virtually. So I thought they did a really good job with that. I'm hopefully going to attend this one as well. So March 9th through 11th, definitely recommend. UX 360, this is one I've never heard of, came across our radar, so we thought we would share it with you all. Happening February 8th through 9th, again, virtual. This is in Berlin. UX New Zealand, so they usually have some really amazing events, but who can get to New Zealand? They created another event, just strictly virtual, so it's happening in February, so this should be pretty cool as well to check out. Job opportunities, there are a lot, which is pretty cool. We've been seeing so much the last, 5-6 months or so. In Massachusetts area, Akoya Biosciences, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but we mentioned it on our Facebook group, and I think in Slack, they're looking for a UX UI designer. Belize, I don't know if I'm saying that right either. They have a few openings. DECA in Manchester, my husband actually used to work there. They're a great company. They're looking for a UX UI designer. Echo User, Jacobs, Pixel, which was a heavy sponsor and let us use their offices when we were meeting in person. So we can't say enough good things about them. They're great. They have a lot of openings. Sophos, SNHU, has a few, and VMware. And a lot of these are remote, which is great. So feel free to check them out. And I just want to open it up too. Is anybody looking for a job you want to mention, or is anyone hiring? No.
I'm looking for a freelance Webflow developer.
Webflow, okay.
I don't know, it's adjacent to this group a bit, but I'll put it out there.
Cool. Yeah. And if anybody wants to add it to chat later, feel free to do so, or share your LinkedIn. It's always good. Just a quick shout out to one of our sponsors, Market Street Talent. If you're looking for UXers, they're the great person to go to. If you are trying to get hired as a UXer, they're willing and always there to give advice, to look at your portfolio, to look at your resume and give a critique. So you can check them out at marketstreettalent.com. They are local to New Hampshire and Portsmouth if you are in town. And now I have the honor to introduce Danielle Cooley. So Danielle has been in the design research and strategy field for a very long time, over 20 years. She has her own company. She is an independent consultant and worked with a lot of big brands. And you can follow her on Twitter at DGCooley. And she's going to talk to us tonight about the participants' well-being is your responsibility. And I am particularly interested in this so much because I mainly do research, and it's such an important topic that I feel like we just don't talk enough about, you know, the possible damage we could do as researchers just talking about sensitive topics, or who knows what. We're entering their world for a little bit. And I think it's really exciting to kind of learn from Danielle these things that we should keep in mind when we're, putting on that facilitator role and really taking care of these people for that hour that we have with them. So I will stop sharing my screen now and turn it over to Danielle.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. Naturally, I hit the wrong button right out of the gate. Let's see. There we go. Working for everyone? Yes, great. So first of all, thanks to everyone who managed to follow us over here from last Thursday. I had some sessions get rescheduled at the very last second that conflicted. So I appreciate your joining us for this last minute reschedule. My topic, as Kyle said, is about the participants' well-being. I'm also a researcher, so coming at it from a slightly different perspective than a pure designer. And this is, I know you've had a couple of other speakers who had contributed to the book, 97 Things Every UX Practitioner Should Know. This is also a chapter from that book. So the chapters are really short, so not a whole lot prepared, but we'll see how long it takes. I do want to tell you a little bit about me, not too much. I have an undergraduate degree from Vanderbilt University in biomedical and electrical engineering, and a graduate degree from Bentley, like many of your New Hampshire UXPA cohorts do as well. And then the rest of this, you can just sort of take away that I don't have a vertical. I do a lot of different industries. I do a lot of different work, hardware, software, web, mobile, apps, sites, touchscreen kiosks, touch-tone telephone systems, physical devices. I did some automotive work in the last few years that was really fun about instrument clusters and center console displays, excuse me. And I have run my own consulting practice for just shy of 13 years. So that has been a lot of fun. Something else I'm happy to talk to anybody about if they're interested. I get sometimes good questions about that. So as a researcher, and I do want to say too, please jump in with questions if you have them, because again, I don't think it's going to push us over, or if you're more comfortable, put them in the chat and the moderator will be happy to pass those along at the end or in a more timely way if needed. As a researcher, what is our job, right? So ultimately, our job is to communicate great observations to the stakeholders who can do something with that information, right? And what makes an observation great? Well, first, it has to be valid, right? It has to be true. We learn something that is true about our users or about our product that is important for other people to know about, right? They're relevant, right? So we can learn a lot of things about people, but if it doesn't have anything to do with the project or the work, that's not super helpful. The observations are clear, that we can communicate them nicely and succinctly in a way that people can understand. And typically a good observation is actionable. So I learned something, you can do something with that information that I got for you. And how do we get those great observations? This is all sort of research 101, right? That we need to start with clearly defined research goals and questions. We need to get the right participants in to participate in that user research. And note, I'm going to start here by calling them participants and not subjects. That is a great way to sort of trick your mind into remembering that they're people, right? And also, we're typically studying our product, right? Or a work environment to learn something. We're not putting variables in front of people and testing them. I also don't use the word test for reasons I'll explain in a little bit. We want to make sure we formulate the right tasks and questions, and to minimize any bias we have going in, bias we have about the product, about the design choices, about the participants, about the larger group of end users, about the stakeholders, right? About how these things are going to be reported out. There's a lot of places where that bias can sneak into our research. And in the midst of all of this, right, that we're trying to keep in our heads, we can forget that these are people and their well-being comes first, right? It comes before our research goal. It comes before our recruiting strategy. It comes before our task phrasing, right? And that paying attention to those needs in the end gives us better observations, right? Our observations are more valid, they're more clear, they're better founded, and hopefully clearer and more actionable as well. Research, if you haven't done it, right, it's easy for us to forget, especially those of us who've been doing this for years and years, that this is something people usually only do once in their life, right? Some of them will do it a handful of times, but generally it's a new environment. They're going to a place they've never been before. They're going to see people they've never been before. They're going to be asked to do things that probably are going to be really hard to do. And they're making themselves vulnerable in many ways. So we need to be aware of that and mindful and respectful of that, right? They're giving us something, and sure, we're giving them some money, right? Hopefully, or a coffee mug if your client's really stingy, but that's not why they're there, really. That's more like a thank you than a reason for most participants in my experience. And if we make that participant feel comfortable and safe, first of all, they open up more. Not everyone, of course, some people you can't get to talk no matter what, but someone who's scared is going to give you terse one-word answers. They're going to laugh stuff off. They're going to be very self-deprecating maybe, right? Which is not wrong or bad, but it's not helpful to me as a researcher, right? It's not giving me a lot more information about their problem space, their context, their problems, or my product, right, that I'm trying to optimize. And usually, unless you're testing a product that is being used when that participant's feeling very unsafe, right? Like it's not an emergency medical alert button or something, car crash, summon help tool. Hopefully they're using your product when they are in a comfortable environment, right? When they are feeling safe. You know, I had a study earlier this year for online healthcare visits, so telemedicine visits that you could do over your phone. And I hope, you know, that, yeah, they're seeking healthcare. There's some concern in their mind, but they don't necessarily have that white coat hypertension experience that so many people have in a clinical setting. They're on their own couch, holding their own phone, you know, in what for them is hopefully a safe environment. So hopefully that would present a more realistic scenario of use that would be more helpful to me as a design researcher. So Kyle talked about people's sort of emotional responses and saying things that might trigger them from some past trauma or identity issue, and that we'll get to that. But also thinking about the super debunked Maslow hierarchy, and Chauncey can chime in with that in a minute. But physical needs are very important, is where I'm going with this too. And it's easy for us to sort of think like, oh, I'm doing a mobile app, I don't really need to worry about somebody's physical needs. That's not really part of what we do. We don't work in dangerous environments typically. And yet that's not always the case. Even if we're just in a traditional lab setting, we need to make sure that the room temperature is at a comfortable level, right? It's not too hot, not too cold. And we have some just sort of basic comfort elements. We need to have good enough lighting for people to be able to see things, especially if they're signing non-disclosure agreements or informed consents at the beginning of their session. If you've given them a task list on a piece of paper, you want to make sure that they can read that easily. You want to make sure their chair is comfortable, right? It's not that broken chair that everybody keeps switching out of the conference room. Just standard, would you like a glass of water? Can I get you a snack, right? Did you rush here from somewhere else that I can, somehow help make you more comfortable? And when I teach classes, I tell people, think of yourself as a host, right? They're your guest. You want to make them feel safe, comfortable, and at home as much as you can. Certainly we try to feed them because a hungry person doesn't think as clearly. So again, unless you're specifically designing a product for use in sort of extreme hunger, make sure they have access to water or snack so that they can be at their best in that session. And again, give you better data. But also sometimes these go into actual safety issues. So certainly I've had, many of you may also have had experiences where we're looking at a manufacturing floor, right? So we do need to make sure that those participants have the appropriate safety gear, that they've done all the things they're supposed to do. I ran a study several years ago where we were doing sessions inside of a car. The manufacturer prototyped this instrument cluster, heads-up display, center console, this whole deal with these steering wheel controls that they were testing out. And the car was not road legal because of these modifications. So we couldn't drive it, which would have added additional safety issues, of course. But instead, we were doing the sessions just inside of a parked car in a parking lot in San Jose in July. So it got very hot. We could not run the air conditioner during the sessions, both because it would short out the prototype and also because it was too loud for us to hear the participant and what they were saying. So we made sure to schedule the sessions really far apart with a good buffer so we could run that air conditioner between sessions and cool off the car, crack the windows as best as we could. But again, there was traffic noise and there was other things that we couldn't really just have the windows wide open. That also would have let some of that precious air conditioning out. And then we made sure we had lots of water for those participants because, of course, I don't have to tell you that a hot car is not a safe place for humans, dogs, anyone to be on a day like that. We also ended up like moving the car around the parking lot during the day, chasing the shade so we could be in there. It was really an interesting set of circumstances that we had to work around in that study. And then there are, of course, mental and emotional needs that people have when they come to us as participants. And these fall into those same categories, right? It's just sort of basic comfort. I'm sort of nervous. I've never been here before. I don't know you. I don't know what you're really after. In a not too long ago article from the Journal of Usability Studies on how professionals moderate usability tests, which was an output of Rolf Malick's CUE 10 study. Chauncey, who's on the call today, was another organizer of that study. And I am one of the co-authors on the article, but we did specifically call out building trust and rapport with the participant as an important factor. So in the beginning of the session, when you're greeting them, when you're making sure their paperwork is done, that they're aware of what they signed, right? That you've offered that glass of water, you ask them a little bit about themselves, maybe they tell you about their pet, right? And just so that you're not a complete stranger, right? You've taken 5 minutes to get to know them and at least take the edge off. You can't build complete trust in that time. But it also starts before that, right? When you're recruiting a person, what are the kind of questions you're asking them? Are they phrased in a way that is supportive and inclusive and helpful? Are you only asking the questions you need to ask? Is the recruiter following up properly? Make sure they aren't nervous about where do I need to go? Where am I going to park? How do I get there? Who do I talk to, right? Make sure they know all those things going in so they don't have that anxiety or trepidation, which some people are more prone to and some people are not bothered by it all, right? They're like, oh, well, I'll figure it out when I get there, no big deal. But just in general, doing what you say you're going to do, if the recruiter tells them someone will meet you at the door and then there's no one there to meet them at the door, then they're going to, by the time they do get to you for the session, they're going to be really flustered. So just in general, doing what you say you're going to do so that they know they can trust you. And then again, this does veer into actual safety issues, right? Psychological safety. And this is more applicable for particularly vulnerable populations. So anybody who's been a victim of domestic violence, if you're dealing with rape crisis applications. I did a study several years ago for MD Anderson Cancer Center, and it was supposed to be for people who are newly diagnosed with cancer, trying to get all their medical records and things uploaded so that they could seek a consultation at MD Anderson. And so then we didn't talk to people who had truly just been diagnosed because they were in the midst of this very serious traumatic experience, right? And so we went a little farther out and we said people who were diagnosed maybe 6 months ago. So they've at least had time to absorb it. And they were able to still reflect back. It wasn't like, 10 years ago when I had my cancer diagnosis, it was like this. So it was still relevant, but it was something that we had to be very sensitive about. One participant said, look, this is hard. I just want to get through this so I can go in my room and cry, right? And that's the kind of thing that I don't think a truly freshly diagnosed patient could have told us or would have been able to function in a session like this. I did a similar study with patients with COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and it is a progressive disease with no cure and only treatment. And in the end, people can't breathe. It's very rough. And once you're diagnosed with this, you just have it in the back of your head that, okay, one day, this is it. I'm going to be on oxygen. I'm going to be bedridden. And it typically progresses very slowly, but it's not something they like to dwell on. And I got participants saying those sorts of things as well. So, we couldn't ask a lot of questions about that. I've done sessions with people who were recently incarcerated or people who had family members who were incarcerated. So I needed to make sure that they knew this was a judgment-free zone, right? I wasn't here to tell you why you're a bad mother because your son ended up on drugs and in jail. Like, that is not what I think. That's not helpful to our session, of course. But people who have had that experience often just walk around feeling judged no matter what, right? Or feeling negative things about that situation. And so again, just thinking about, okay, how do we phrase this? And especially if these are experiences that we haven't had personally in our lives, right? It's harder sometimes to truly empathize. You can think that's got to be rough, but that's not the same as having lived through it. So anyone with particularly traumatic past experiences, we need to be very careful with how we treat before, during, and after the sessions. And then sometimes you just have to stop a session. So these are my 2 stop a session stories. One participant before a remote session logged into our Zoom just like normal. And she said, I hate to ask this, but can I reschedule because I'm having chest pains? So I said, of course you reschedule, hang up with me, call 911. Don't worry about it. We'll figure it all out later. Please make sure you're okay. And she didn't call 911, but she did lay down and ended up rescheduling her session. But she really felt bad about it. And of course, we had to stop. And it might have been tempting, right? If she were willing to go on, or if she, sometimes a participant, you'll find out, is driving a car during an interview, and you just have to say, okay, it's unethical for me to continue this session. As much as I need data from you, as much as I need to hear your take on things, that's not going to happen right now. And then another session, I observed this session. Thankfully, I was not the moderator, and it was in a lab setting. So the participant came in and just had tremendously bad body odor, like just tremendously bad body odor. And the concern was that the smell would linger in the participant room and that the next participant would be wildly uncomfortable in there. And so they stopped that session and just sent that person home and said, oh, we got all we need. Thank you very much. Of course, never making that person feel bad about, anything, or even necessarily know that something was wrong. Paid his participant stipend, and then, kept the door open, brought in fans and things to give the room extra time to air out before the next participant arrived. So sometimes you never know what's going to happen. Really, really fun, which is why it's still interesting to me after 20 years, right? Every session, every study, something surprises me. So it's pretty fun. And then even after this study, our job is not over, right? So our participant came and went, we got a lot of great notes, maybe we recorded the session, but now we got to make sure they get paid. Sometimes, great, they get paid while they're walking out the door. More typically, there's a follow-up. If there's postal mail, good grief, that can take forever now. Even if it's email, it's challenging sometimes to help them understand when they can expect that payment and to make sure that they do get it in a prompt way. Again, this is just answering their questions ahead of time to reduce any anxiety they have about anything. And then continue protecting their identity. Their participation is anonymous, and that remains true throughout the rest of the activity. So in your report, you need to make sure that you don't use their full names. There's some debate about whether you can use first names or initials, but certainly continue protecting their identity. I had a colleague ran sessions, did contextual observations with employees of a very large corporation, and found out in the course of that ethnographic work that several of these people were not handling some data properly. They were locking something in their desk instead of going and putting it into super secure filing room or something like that. And the reason they were doing that was because it was impossible for them to fulfill their job requirements if they were constantly, doing things the right way. It just took too much time and they couldn't do it. So they bandaged things together the best they could. And of course, the stakeholders wanted to know who that was. And my colleagues, I cannot tell you that. And I promise you, if these people are doing it, lots of other people are doing it too. That's why we don't have to talk to everyone, right? But those people's jobs became in jeopardy because of things that they let us in and let us see, right? So we need to be careful about those sorts of things. And of course, to represent them and their opinions fairly in our findings. So to make sure we don't say, everybody hated it if not everybody hated it, or, this participant said something they didn't. If we quote them, we want to make sure we quote them accurately. both in words and in sentiment, right? We don't take things out of context and misrepresent anyone's position. So in summary, and there's plenty I did not cover, but I'll get to a few things later, but keeping the participants' physical and emotional comfort and safety in mind is paramount to our work, to ensuring we are doing good design research. Besides just being the moral and ethical thing to do, it gives us better data. And it's a natural continuation of our work, right? We're doing this to make people's lives better, to make them less frustrated as they interact with products and systems in their day-to-day lives. And extending that to research participants is, to me, a very natural thing to do. So I do have some, of course, additional things. The Moderator's Survival Guide, if you have not read it, is really fun, covers pretty much any topic that might come up, any sticky situation that might come up when you're moderating a live session in person or remote. It's been out for a few years, but the stories are really good. And generally the advice is try to get some data if you can, but if you can't, sometimes you can't. So a little more detailed than I went into tonight. Of course, 97 things every practitioner should know. There's a great research section in there. That's where my chapter is. Kyle, is that where your chapter is too, in the research section?
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm. And of course, several others that you've spoken with. And this one, it is pretty fundamental. It's 97 things every practitioner should know, but you still learn a lot, or you still get reminded of a lot of things. And each chapter is only 2 to 3 pages. So, and they don't have to be read sequentially. So you can just pick it up, get a little nugget of wisdom, pick it up the next week, get a different little nugget. And it's really a nice book. And then while I was doing some of the prep for this talk, I ran across the Ethical Researchers Checklist from Alba Villamil. And I have not been able to talk to her about it yet, although I'm hopeful that I'll be able to connect with her soon. But there are a couple of links here, and I'm of course happy to share this deck about the Ethical Researchers Checklist, which goes through, what are we doing to make sure that we're not harming participants in any way, right? We're not harming them physically, psychologically, financially. We're not risking their job security. She has a story where she was doing a remote session and was recording the participant's screen, and an alert popped up that he needed to take his HIV PrEP medicine. So now she had a recorded session that disclosed this person's HIV status potentially to their employer, which of course leaves him at risk for discrimination, firing, and lots of very bad things. So all kinds of really random stuff can come up that you don't think about necessarily and do need to make sure you cover. There's also a short video presentation that she has that is publicly available on YouTube. And then Humanity Centered is something that Vivian Castillo started a year or 2 ago. It's pretty new. It's an organization that looks at the whole human-centered design for the whole person. So not just sort of, we talk a lot about accessible design, right? And we talk about universal design, where it's accessible for everyone without special accommodations. And more we're moving to inclusive design, where we're not just looking at people with disabilities and whether they can use it, but we're also looking at it through a lens of things like race, gender identity, sexual preference, religious identity, cultural identity, geography, all kinds of different things that we haven't looked at very carefully as a community as a whole. And they're doing some really good work to get that done there. Right now, all you can do on the website is sign up for notifications for when things are going, but they did just have a afternoon sort of mini conference workshop last week, 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, that was really, really fascinating and highly valuable. And I believe recordings of that will be made available for purchase once they have them all compiled and are ready to go. So that's another great resource if you're interested in taking a closer look at some of these ethical research principles. And that is all I have. I'm DGCooley just about everywhere. I try to make myself easy to find. If you have any questions or would like to connect, I would love to do that. And I see we do have some messages in the chat. I haven't seen what they are, but I'll open up to questions, comments. If you have your own stories of sessions where people got hurt or got scared or felt unsafe, I would love to hear those as well. You do this long enough, you start to get some.
Thank you so much, Danielle. That was great.
Thanks, Kyle.
Hi, Danielle. This is Anne Marie.
Hi.
That was really helpful and so good to hear, and good reminders of the work that we do and how we do it. I was moderating a session with the body odor. It may have been the same session that you were observing.
I didn't see that you were on the call. Yeah, that was your session.
That was my session. Yeah, and I wanted to just add a little bit of color to that. And I think that, yes, the idea of getting the lab to stop smelling before the next session was very important. But in addition to that, I was having a hard time actually not gagging because the strong smell was that intense. And I think that part of what you're talking about today and part of what's so important about what you're saying is that not only as moderators do we need to be observant and we need to be aware of a sort of the state of the participant while they're working with us, but we also need to be prepared to, in a way, have a poker face, in a way not share what we're observing, so that we can facilitate sort of a better experience for them while they're with us, and we can, as you said, make them feel as good as they can, so that they give us what we're looking for. They give us the data that we need, and we can sort of move them in and move them out, and have things end nicely. Yeah.
It's so hard. And we always have to have that poker face, right? If it's just like, why on earth did you click on that thing? I can't screw up my face and have that in the session. But then it's something like that where you're literally trying not to gag. That is really hard. And of course you do that and you make them feel terrible, and you're not having a good session. So
yeah. So I think that the idea of sharing this, and of all of us remembering that we have to be prepared when we walk in for whatever's going to transpire in that 30 or 60 minutes, is such an important part of the message that you're delivering.
We do. And of course we all get better with practice, more and more. I'm like, okay, throw it at me. What's it going to be today?
Exactly.
We manage.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thanks, Anne Marie.
I think it's absolutely wild what can and does happen during these sessions. I only had one in all of my years that had a physical issue. We were testing an IV pump and having nurses come in and try out a new prototype. And the IV pump, hangs from the thing that it hangs from, and it's not secured. And sometimes it's secured to the pole itself, sometimes it's not. In this case, it wasn't. The participant went in to press something, and the thing swung and hit her right in the face. And it kind of came back and almost did it again. You had to quickly stop it. And it was one of the worst things about it, of it happening, was that there were observers in the room too, and they chuckled when it happened. And I gave them the look of death, when that happened, and the person, of course, embarrassed. Oh, how stupid! I'm sorry. And she's apologizing when she shouldn't be apologizing. And I never thought about what could happen. I never really thought about. We just assumed they'd hold it with one hand and hit with the other, and she just hit it. So of course we secured it right afterwards, but I was totally unprepared for that. I never would have ever expected that somebody would get hurt during a session. The closest I ever got to it, but it's part of like that opening spiel now for me, like, do not laugh. Like we always expect them to laugh if they're doing something, and we always tell them not to, but like if they physically hurt themselves, not.
Definitely. Well, it's another argument to get the observers in another room if you can at all, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. But that's interesting, because I don't think I've ever experienced anything physically other than that, lots of emotional stuff. But I wanted to ask you, there's so many different ways to go about it. And I think it's really personal as moderators, how we address certain things that come up. It's just, our personal style, how we feel comfortable dealing with them. And I'm wondering for you, what do you think or how do you approach when somebody is having a real hard time emotionally? How do you approach that?
Typically, I feel like I would ask them if they would like to take a break. Would you like to take a break for a few minutes? We can get some water, or, I can just give you a few minutes. But I haven't had too many really traumatic experiences like that, thankfully. But just in general, we do tend to tell them at the beginning of the session, or at least I always plan to, right, that they're allowed to take a break at any time. They can withdraw their consent to participate at any time. And sometimes I'll remind them of that, like, hey, it seems a little tense. Let's do that. If I can alternate task order or something, maybe I'll give them an easier task right then, if it's not emotional trauma, right? If sometimes they just get so flustered because the product is so hard to use and they can't do it. Another story that's not mine is somebody had a participant no-show. So they grabbed an employee who wasn't busy, and she wasn't busy because it was her first day. And they put her in front of this thing, and it was terrible. And she just thought she was going to get fired on her first day because she couldn't use this impossible to use software. Oh. And, of course, they were all mortified, and the poor woman did not have a good first day at her new job. So, you never know when it's going to be something really, really traumatic. But I think just offering to take a break, or maybe you could even step back and say, hey, is there something else you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about this some more? Sometimes they just, not that we're trained therapists, I don't want to suggest that or say anything, but sometimes if people are feeling things, they want to talk about them. And so if that's something you feel comfortable with, feel like you can manage, then that's a possibility. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Danielle, this is Chauncey. One of the things you brought up was the person, doing an internal test, or doing a test on an internal person. I'm sorry, I shouldn't use the word test here. Inviting an internal person to be a part of a study. And I had rules like no managers can observe. I've seen some cases where people say, I can't believe that Chauncey couldn't do that when he was in that study I watched. So I think sometimes we have to be even more diligent about internal participants than, at least as diligent, but they could also destroy their jobs, as you noted in your example. So,
and they're much easier to identify, right? If I'm doing internal software for a corporation, they have usually told me, go to this branch, this branch, this branch, and this branch, and here's your schedule, right? So they know who I talked to. Even if I never identify that person, they know it's one of these 8 people. And so that makes it pretty tough sometimes. Got to be extra careful. Sorry.
I work on within corporate or enterprise technology, or at least I have for the last few years. So definitely resonates the detail around making sure that your coworkers are essentially protected. And also your story about bringing somebody in to participate on their very first day. I actually conducted a good sized study of the onboarding experience at my previous company. And so we did a diary study that kicked off on day one for new hires. And we had sort of an orientation session. And then we would check in with them over the course of 30 days. And it really stood out to me how people internalize their lack of ability to be successful as something that is in fact their lack of ability, when it's like, no, actually we've designed a terrible experience for you. And so I definitely have found myself in multiple one-on-one sessions really reinforcing for people like this is a flaw in the process, this is a flaw in the system or the tools, this isn't a reflection of your abilities. And that was something that I think actually really helped when for our stakeholders, when we were sharing out our findings, when we could give these quotations of people basically like flogging themselves and realizing like, wow, so basically in somebody's first 2 or 3 days as a new employee at our company, we're sending their self-esteem into the toilet. And that, I think that really struck a chord and helped to mobilize people to say, yeah, we really need to make this better.
That's great that positive action came out of it, right? A lot of times stakeholders are not on board in the right way to take that message. So that's great. I do tell
Christine, I think, oh, sorry.
I was going to say, I do tell my participants, we're not here to evaluate you, we're here to evaluate this product. If you can't find something or something seems difficult, that's a big red flag to us that something about the product needs to change before we launch it and hundreds of thousands of other people can't do or can't find that thing. And sometimes it goes in one ear and out the other, but I like to think it helps. I think I've talked to Chauncey about this before, but this whole concept of them blaming themselves seems contrary to me to the fundamental attribution error, where in general psychology, if you yelled at that cashier because you're a jerk, right? If I yell at the cashier, it's because I had a bad minute, right? My dog was sick. I didn't sleep well last night. I was frustrated because I couldn't find my checkbook fast enough or my credit card. So you blame other people's issues on their own selves, but if you do something inappropriate, you blame it on your external factors. But in a session, if something doesn't work, they blame themselves. They don't blame it on external factors, right? The way they would. So I have coined the reverse fundamental attribution error, but I don't have enough depth of knowledge to really pick that apart and restructure it in a meaningful way.
So I wonder if, the ambiguity of the situation, there are probably 3 or 4 factors that might reverse that. So that's something we should work on. There's a paper.
I love it. Please, let's do that.
A little thing, you mentioned privacy, and I think, I work for a company where people like shared spreadsheets with everybody's personal information, and it became my job to like make it so that didn't happen, which we did over time. But one of the things I noticed is that people don't understand the difference between anonymity, having no way to trace somebody, although with sophisticated systems that's getting harder, versus confidentiality. So almost everything we do is confidential, that we try to protect the names, but that you can trace the person. And things like on SurveyMonkey, if you take the default setting, I think it tracks IP addresses, which you could find somebody, but you can turn those off and at least come close to anonymity with that. So yeah, it's my wife's a lawyer, so she highlights some of these issues for me.
On your toes, I know.
Yeah, so we need to be really careful. I can think of very few cases where we can really say it's anonymous, and it's really, most of the time we can connect the person, and it's confidential, and we do our best. So yeah.
I see Sherry's hand up.
Yes. Hi. I just wanted to share a story that happened to my company as an agency just this past week. We had a client who had given us the list of employees to talk to internally because we were testing. They were doing the interviews actually with employees to see how they felt about the IT department. So it was a completely internal thing. And so the researcher that was on my team set up all of the team with, with all the participants with Zoom. And then the client said, no, you have to use Teams. So she had to go back and redo those. So here's emails going back and forth with Teams. Well, because, each session is individual, but the Teams does not work the same as Zoom, and she wasn't aware of how Teams worked, it was putting the same video into the same chat and alerting the people before and after that there was a video available. So everyone who is a participant could see the video. And it was like,
other participant? Oh, wow.
Yes. And so they're not going to be very forthcoming, And so we shut all of that down, and she was able to get individual session links for teams to put into the invitations and resent them. But she's like, now we've got 3 or 4 emails coming. How much trust do they have in me now? And it was not necessarily her fault. And I told her, we have no control over permissions or any of those things or settings that they have on the Teams. We weren't aware that Teams does not work the same as Zoom, as on the video links. But above all, we do have a clause in our plan that this is ethics. The ethics of this is that this is for research only. Mm-hmm. And we made sure our project manager talked with the leadership there and said the same, and said, we jumped on this as soon as we realized this was an issue, and we've changed it. And this is what we've done to complete this, just to stay on top of it. Nobody complained. Nobody said anything. This one participant said, I can see this. And it just, she totally jumped on it. But just to let you, these things are going to happen. Sometimes you cannot help those things. All we can do, but we said, we're holding you accountable on the ethics part too, on the research. It's not just on our side, it's on your side as well. So I just wanted to share that story because it's something we certainly don't want to happen, and we don't want to lose trust with the participants, but we can only do so much as humans.
That's a great story. I do see, even I've been doing so many Zoom sessions lately, and of course everybody's name pops up at the bottom, and I'm like, well, I can rename you. I can, but people's first and last names are in that recording. So often.
Right. And we do try to, whenever I do the test plan, I make sure that whenever we're going over the test plan, that they understand the ethics part of it, that these recordings are for research purposes only and not to be used, for any other reason. And that way it's documented. They cannot say they didn't know that.
Yeah. That's great to put it in the contract, and yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and it's in the test plan, that they have to approve of.
I like that. David.
Yes. So I'm still pretty new to user research. Is there any situation where you would want to put the participant under duress, controlled? And I'm thinking of a situation like, I know firefighters, for example, they might do trainings, right, where they have to go into a burning building and do that sort of thing. Is that could you explain maybe a little bit more about those situations that might be controlled?
So I would say yes, there are situations. I would start without that, because if they can't use the product in a calm situation, they certainly can't use the product in a stressful situation. So there's no need to put them under stress in the first round or two, right? Until that's the part you're testing, the part you're trying to evaluate, part of your core research question. And then of course, you need to do a lot to make sure that there's safety controls. And there are independent IRBs, similar to academic research for human subjects, where the university's independent review board would say, yes, we're going to approve this study. You've properly outlined the risks and benefits. You're going to make everybody aware of the risks, and you're doing everything you can do to make this safe and useful for people. I think certainly you can't do anything grossly negligent, like people driving a car and trying to do things that a client did ask me to do. And I was very curious to see how that was going to work out. And then the project got defunded. So I didn't get to find out, but that's something they do fairly regularly and not always on a closed course. So that's interesting. There's some other research that they only do on closed courses, but it's all happening more than we think. And I think, we all know the ideal scenario and are maybe have some trouble deciding, how far away from ideal can we get and still be doing good research. Does that answer your question? Did you have any other?
I think that was the big one, actually. I can't think of anything at the moment. I might before the session's over, though.
Sure, all good. Anne-Marie?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to say that all of this is just a real reminder to us of the importance of pilot sessions, that we do it once at least, so that we at least have the opportunity to see from beginning to end what it's going to feel like and what it's going to seem like to the person who's participating in it. And there's a sort of a fine line between creating some discomfort during the test sessions in some safe way. And as you said, Danielle, we are not like professionals. We can't probably manage that as well as we might need to. But there's a part of that, I think what David was getting at, that really will become part of the findings. So a couple of examples, one from financial services, where the only time that I saw someone cry during a session was when we were testing a tool to understand whether you were prepared to retire. And, we could have anticipated it because it's going to tell a person, whether they're okay. And as people went through the test and they reflected on their own real life experiences, they would realize, maybe I'm not okay. Maybe I'm not okay to retire. And that was hard for some people, and we saw it play out in the lab. And more recently, I tested people who are in their sort of late 60s to beyond, where they were doing a sort of a survey or a quiz around mild cognitive impairment, where they were it was kind of fun and it seemed lighthearted and like check yes, check no, yes, yes, no, no. And then they'd get to the end and they would look at it and it would indicate that they had mild cognitive impairment. And so the realization would wash over them in the session. And on the one hand, it was very tricky because you wanted to be careful that people didn't feel so much discomfort that it was beyond anything that we could manage.
Sure.
But on the other hand, you wanted your stakeholders and your observers to see that, because in fact, yeah, this is what it's going to feel like to someone sitting in their own family room on their sofa doing this quiz, and this is what it's going to feel like to them. Is this what we want? And is this okay? And is this the best that we can do? To where do we want to leave them in the experience, and how do we test that, and how do we best design for those situations?
That's really rough.
Yeah, because at what point do you say, now you just need to contact your doctor? It's just like, wow.
Well, that's what the findings would tell them to do. But right, is that a good use of a digital experience? Are we thinking and are we being responsible when someone hits a done button and it's like, bzz, you're not ready to retire. You won't be ready to retire. You're not on track.
Mhm.
Or you do have mild cognitive impairment, or at least you have the symptoms of it. And of
Mhm.
course, we can't really diagnose financial security or mental health in a simple digital experience, but we do have to be aware that we're asked to create those experiences, to design them and to test them. And we have the opportunity in the lab or in our sessions to show the stakeholders, you know, what sort of experience and what sort of emotional state and what sort of outcomes the digital experience will leave people with.
Right. And
are we
it's
leaving them
not
where we
just-
want them to be?
Right. Right. And it's not just, you know, healthcare and things like that. We often the design is often done on the happy path, and we don't realize that there's things that can happen that are more frustrating for the user, or for the participant, or, you know, the person on the other side of the screen needs, they're in an emotional state or whatever before they even start. And we don't know what that is. So we have to assume that if we have to be very forgiving in the design and help them along the way to help them figure things out, and that sort of thing, give them clear indications of the system of where, you know, this is happening. You push the button and you see the progress bar, or any of those things you have to be careful of, so that you're not causing the additional stress if you know, if you're not supposed
Yeah.
to.
Yeah,
Well,
and
and then
because
you
we
think
don't
about-
always have the opportunity to design, because it's often sort of the business requirements and then the
Right.
designers who are doing that work.
Mhm.
We have the opportunity to be well prepared to do pilots so that we know, or at least have the opportunity to discover, for example, Kyle, with the hanger hitting someone in the face.
Mhm.
You know, maybe that would have come out in a pilot, maybe not, but maybe. So, I mean, we have remembered to do pilots, remember the importance of them, and understand that there could be some discomfort in our sessions, but it has some value to our findings. And it's a very fine line, you know, that we need to walk.
Yeah. And even something simple, I just did a unmoderated test, and just the question that I asked of, where would you expect to find leadership information? And they were kind of confused about what leadership meant. If it was for the company, or for the program, or for as a parent or a student, what leadership meant. So they didn't know what they were looking for. So a pilot may have brought that out.
Mhm.
I also neglected to run a pilot on a tree test a couple of weeks ago, and didn't destroy the study or anything, but I would have gotten better results for sure if I had done a couple of moderated pilot sessions and modified the tasks a bit.
Yeah, it's really hard to poke holes in your own stuff. That's
Definitely.
why I love the collaboration with other team members.
Always helpful. Right. I see Sydney had a question. Are you still here, Sydney? I saw we lost. Nope, looks like no. That's all right. Their question was about the consulting practice, so I didn't want to switch to that topic unless we were done with this one, which I could talk about all night. I mean, it's more and more fascinating to me how you know, we're barely even including users with disabilities in our research studies, right? Unless that specifically is the point. And you know, it's so challenging to recruit in general, and we're time limited, right? And if you try to have more and more quotas and intersections of Venn diagrams, like find me a cisgender male Jewish person who has worked in IT for more than 10 years, like how are you going to find that person? And if the recruiter can, they're going to charge you $400 to find them. So we're all just doing the best we can, but
Absolutely.
be aware that, hey, we're missing a few things by being, good, fast, or cheap, right? So we're edging into the cheap side, maybe not cheap, but cheaper, right?
And less quality.
We're losing some of the good, I think. Yeah.
But maybe as researchers, we can make that make sure that that is in the, in as a statement, or what do you call it, a disclaimer. We're only representing the ones that we can recruit, and that we're, within our means. This is not fully representative of disabled, or that sort of thing. So,
and sometimes we'll put that with finding this could be a result of a sampling error. We had to use a convenience sample for this study. So
right, good point. Yeah.
Go ahead, David.
I thought I told you I might have another question.
Good.
So how do you approach things differently when you're dealing with when you're dealing internally, or within your own organization?
In what regard?
I guess as far as either finding sample sizes, or even just how you approach, I guess, even sensitivity, for lack of better terms. Like, I don't know if there's any difference. Like I said, I'm pretty new to usability, so testing.
I think it's a little more nuanced, a little more. So when in the very beginning of my career, I worked in a financial services company, and my group was responsible for internal products. And sometimes it was a specific internal product, right, for the marketing department or something. But sometimes it was for any employee. Sometimes it was, our own retirements package, right? So we literally used Outlook to target specific floors or buildings, and we would send mass emails to those people to recruit. Now, that's not going to work if you need to talk specifically to salespeople, right? Or later at a different financial services company, I was dealing with an application that was about a specific type of account. And so then it was, okay, which brokers do the most volume in that type of account? And that's who we ended up going to talk to, right? And that was one where it was like, okay, I talked to these 7 people. So if I come back and tell you participant 6 said this, you got a pretty good idea of who that is. I mean, add a little context and about the business, you can probably narrow it down to 3, as one of these 3 people. So I hate to fall back on you just do the best you can, but you do try to, right? And you do, in that study, one thing we found out was that the process of opening one of those accounts was so complicated that 3 different branches had created their own sort of cheat sheet where they would just fill it in on paper. Some were typed, some were handwritten and photocopied. And so they weren't creating the account on the computer with the customer. They were just filling out the data and doing it later, which, hello, big red flag that this is really too hard, right? If 3 different branches have done that, but the brokers' names were on those pieces of paper. So when I put that in the report, I blacked out the broker's name so they wouldn't know which branches had specifically done that. Not that it was a bad thing to do. It wasn't necessarily wrong, right? But like I said, one was handwritten, one was typed. Did we want somebody to go back and say, oh, you're being unprofessional? Did the customer see this handwritten thing that you made? And we just wanted no repercussions about it at all. And so we redacted names and identifiable information from that. So, yeah.
I would add to that, as someone, again, who is primarily working on like enterprise side, you had said falling back on you do the best you can. I think we always try to, even in a scenario where maybe we do have a smaller sample size and it is very targeted, AKA anybody with any degree of resourcefulness could probably identify, who might be participating. We always will still, report in aggregate assign participant numbers, never use names. And I think from my perspective, I feel like following those best practices, I think it just at least sends a message to our stakeholders that, as researchers, we are trying to be professional, we're trying to be respectful. And I do think it helps to set a tone that, the people who are taking the time, our fellow coworkers who are taking the time to help us learn about the things that we're producing for them, that they really are, like, obviously we couldn't do it without them. That's any participant in any scenario, but in a way, it feels like internal people are almost like, you in some ways have a captive audience. So I feel like it's important from my perspective to always be following those best practices, even if somebody could crack that code, because I want to set that tone of professionalism and respect.
And I mean, I'll bring that up as maybe a difference. I sort of weigh the pros and cons every time, but I would never use like a first name only or a first name last initial or even just initials in an internal report like the one Christine just described. Whereas if I'm doing an external recruit from the general public in a different city than my clients are headquartered in, I think it is helpful sometimes, right, to give the participants names because it humanizes them a little bit more, right? They're not these amorphous blobs who, maybe whose opinion I don't have to listen to, or I can just decide they're stupid, right? I can say, no, Christine said this, David said this. And I've even included photos in reports, which I rarely do. I mean, I've done it maybe 2 or 3 times in my career, but I want them to see that this is a person who's using your product and they're having a hard time and they're going to tell their friends that they had a hard time, or, they're going to do something worse. And gosh, if it's your first day at work, right? Especially now with retention and turnover, and you want to make sure that those things that they land, that your reports have impact when they go back to the stakeholders. But I would never do that internally.
Right. Depending on the like you said, the participant base, I've used numbers, user or parent or student number 7 or whatever, and let them know that it can be traced back to that individual file, but I'm not given their name at that time. And then I've also done video clips of them, sharing their screen and talking through it, just giving a little snippet so they can hear it in the user's voice.
And that's another great way to lend a little bit of humanity. If you call parent 7 instead of participant 7, right? Even if all the participants were parents, that doesn't matter.
Right.
That can help a little bit too. That's great.
This is great stuff. Thanks.
Thank you for your great questions.
Yeah, great discussion. Thanks, everyone.
It's always fascinating to hear all these stories.
I know.
It is. We all have good stories.
Well, this is great. I'm so glad that you could come tonight and present.
Me too. Thanks so much for having me. And again, thanks to everybody for staying with us through the reschedule. I apologize for that and appreciate your attendance and your questions and your stories.
Well, we'll make the recording available probably tomorrow. And we also have our next talk coming up December 16th with Jen Blatz. She's going to be talking about how to better present UX work. So good. Thank you.
Jen's
all.
awesome.
Nice segue.
Yeah.
Jen's awesome. She's really funny.
Yeah.
That's great.
Thanks,
Cool.
Danielle, and thanks, Kyle, for putting this together. It's really helpful.
Yeah. Thank you all so much.
It's good to hear from you.
Okay, have a good night, everyone.
All right. Happy
Bye.
Thanksgiving.
Bye-bye.
Bye.